They are a mystery as old as time itself. This basic shape is universal. You may be surprised to know that pyramids can be found on every continent on the planet. No one knows why our ancestors chose this shape to design and construct their greatest monuments. Pyramids of all sizes can be found in the Middle East, Latin America, Asia, Europe, and the North American continent. They stand as reminders that modern technology is not the pinnacle of our achievements. Who built the pyramids, and how old are they? Why this specific shape? How were they constructed, and what was their purpose? Pyramids are the greatest wonder of the world. Modern scientists use carbon dating to determine the age of ancient artifacts. But carbon dating only works with organic objects. It does not work with stone or rock. In order to determine the age of rock, scientists must first find something organic near the rock and date that, such as wood, fabric, or other organic materials. Because we cannot date stone itself, we truly have no idea the age of all stone structures. Our dating methods are an educated guess at best. Archaeologists believe Egypt's large pyramids were the work of the Old Kingdom society that rose to prominence in the Nile Valley around 3000 BC. Historical analysis tells us that the Egyptians built the Giza pyramids in a span of 85 years between 2589 and 2504 BC. Now, most archaeologists say the Sphinx is about 4,500 years old. However, some claim that the vertical weathering patterns on the Sphinx could only have been made thousands of years earlier when the area had abundant rainfall. So, what is the truth? The pyramid texts are a collection of ancient Egyptian religious texts from the time of the Old Kingdom. They are possibly the oldest known religious texts in the world. Written in Old Egyptian, the pyramid texts are carved on the walls and sarcophagi of the pyramids at Saqqara during the 5th and 6th dynasties of the Old Kingdom. The oldest of the texts have been dated to between 2400 and 2300 BC. These texts do not mention the Sphinx. Why? Because it was buried in the sand until 1400 BC. Evidence that Thutmose IV's campaign is preserved in the so-called dream stele he erected between the two paws of the Sphinx in 1400 BC. According to the story inscribed in the stela, the Sphinx spoke to him in a dream and asked the prince to free him from the sand, which he did. Therefore, the Egyptians did not build the Sphinx, they discovered it. If the Egyptians didn't construct the Sphinx, who did and when? Is the Great Pyramid of Giza as old as the Sphinx as well? The Giza-Orion correlation theory is a hypothesis in pyramidology. Its central claim is that there is a correlation between the location of the three largest pyramids of the Giza Pyramid Complex and the three middle stars of the constellation Orion, and that this correlation was intended as such by the pyramid builders. This alignment occurred 12,500 years ago. The Orion correlation theory states that the construction of the Great Sphinx was begun in 10,500 BC, that the Sphinx's lion shape is a definitive reference to the constellation of Leo, and that the layout and orientation of the Sphinx The Giza Pyramid Complex and the Nile River are an accurate reflection or map of the constellations of Leo, Orion's Belt, and the Milky Way respectively. There is no other way to explain this correlation. 12,500 BC is the only time in the precession of the equinoxes when the astrological age was Leo and when that constellation rose directly east of the Sphinx at the vernal equinox. These propositions and other theories are used to support the overall belief in an advanced and ancient but now vanished global progenitor civilization. Add to this, the Sphinx has been heavily weathered by rainwater and must therefore have been carved in pre-dynastic times. With these facts, you begin to understand how our dating methods are inaccurate at best. The ancient pyramids are likely the most known of all the pyramids around the world, but they are not the only majestic monuments to reach for the skies. A recently discovered and little-known pyramid has existed for eons in the Republic of Bosnia. The Bosnian pyramids are a pseudo-archaeological claim promoted by Arthur Seymour Osmanagic that a cluster of hills in central Bosnia and Herzegovina are the largest human-made ancient pyramids on Earth. The hills are located near the town of Visokovo, where the old town of Iskai was once sited, and became the focus of international attention in October 2005 following a news media campaign by Seymour and his supporters. Osmanagic states that he has found tunnels, stone blocks, and ancient mortar which he has suggested once covered the structure. He opened excavations in 2006 which have reshaped the hill, making it look like a stepped pyramid. Geologists, archaeologists, and other scientists have, however, concluded after analysis of the site, its known history, and the excavations that the hills are a natural formation known as flatrons, and that there are no signs of human construction involved. The European Association of Archaeologists released a statement calling the pyramid hypothesis a cruel hoax. However, in 2007, a report by Egyptologist Nabil Mohammed Saloum was published by the Archaeological Park, which said that the Pyramid of the Sun was the world's largest pyramid. After 2 visits to Bastia, he released a report in 2007 in which he concluded, arguments in favor or in disfavor have no effect on the fact that the pyramid concept and the properties are there for everyone to see. In 2010, he released a report in which he clarified that he does not claim it is a man-made pyramid, but rather that he uses the term for a feature natural or artificial, which is a geometric pyramid. He does not exclude the possibility it is man-made. If the Bosnian pyramid is man-made, it is the largest in the world and possibly the oldest. It would be a paramount discovery to modern pyramidology. In October 2011, Sarajevo Court ended a 4-year court case by giving permission for further investigation of the Bosnian pyramid. From Bosnia to South America, more pyramids can be found. There is no dispute that Machu Picchu is an enormous structure constructed by pyramid builders. According to scientists, Machu Picchu was built around 1450 at the height of the Incan Empire. It was abandoned just over 100 years later in 1572. Although the citadel is located only about 50 miles from Cusco, the Inca capital, the Spanish never found it, and consequently did not plunder or destroy it as they did many other sites. Over the centuries, The surrounding jungle grew over the site, and few knew of its existence. According to theory, Machu Picchu was a place for Pakakuri and his royal court, or pansia, to relax, hunt, and entertain guests. It is a belief among some New Age cosmologists that aliens once inhabited the Cusco region of Peru and are responsible for building Machu Picchu's grand architecture. These views have been widely refuted by Peruvians, as they feel their ancestors were capable of such technological and archaeological feats. The central buildings at Machu Picchu use the classical Inca architectural style of polished dry stone walls of regular shape. The Incas were masters of this technique, called ashlar, in which blocks of stone are cut to fit perfectly, tightly, without mortar. Many junctions in the central city are so perfect that it is said that not even a blade of grass fits between the stones. It is a conundrum how Machu Picchu was constructed. The Incas never used the wheel in any practical manner. Its use in toys demonstrates that the principle was well known to them, although it was not applied in their engineering. The lack of strong draft animals, as well as steep terrain and dense vegetation issues, may have rendered the wheel impractical. How they moved and placed the enormous blocks of stones remains a mystery, although the general belief is that they used hundreds of men to push the stones up inclined planes. A few of the stones still have knobs on them that could have been used to lever them into position. It is believed that after the stones were placed, the Incas would have sanded the knobs away, but a few were overlooked and remain to this day. From the plateau of Machu Picchu to the outback of Australia, pyramids abound all over the world. The Gympie Pyramid is a low terraced hill located in the outskirts of Gympie in Queensland, Australia, alleged to have been created by European immigrants in the late 19th or early 20th century, though there is no record of this. Many speculate that it was constructed by an unknown civilization, Egyptians, South Americans, or perhaps the Chinese. Rex Gilroy claims that he discovered the Gympie Pyramid in 1975 and claimed that the pyramid was created by the Egyptians, who had mining operations in Australia centuries ago, with bases of operation reaching as far as the Blue Mountains in New South Wales. In an article on the subject, Anthony G. Wheeler writes, "It seems that a terraced hill was claimed to be a pyramid on the basis of a nearby stone wall around a church being of unusual construction. It was supposed by local legends and taboos that warned against intrusion into the pyramid area, the predominance in the area of a cactus of South or Central American origin, a statue, an Iron Man or Gympie ape, of non-Aboriginal manufacture found nearby, and some crude inscriptions on a stone block dug up in the area." Wheeler notes that an amateur archaeologist became convinced that the pyramid and other features were evidence of ancient settlement in Australia by the Incas of South America. Wheeler argues that the claims of an extraordinary origin for the pyramid are unfounded, writing the facts are probably that the Gympie Golden Pyramid is actually an ordinary hill terraced by early Italian immigrants for viticulture that has been disfigured by erosion and the removal of stone from the remaining walls for use elsewhere. As for all the supporting statements by the various authorities, all but a few unimportant ones fade away as one after another provides to be a misquote, a falsification, or an outright fabrication. Currently, the Queensland Department of Main Roads is planning to build a road through the site. If destroyed, we may never know if the Gympie Pyramid is ancient or a modern structure. A multitude of pyramids dot the landscape of Mexico in North America. Most famous of these pyramids are the structures at Teotihuacan. These two towering pyramids are dedicated to the sun and the moon. Teotihuacan was the largest city in the pre-Columbian Americas, with a population estimated at 125,000 or more. The early history of Teotihuacan is quite mysterious, and the origin of its founders is uncertain. For many years, archaeologists believed it was built by the Toltec. This belief was based on colonial period texts, such as the Florentine Codex, which attributed the site to the Toltecs. However, the word Toltec generally means craftsman of the highest level, and may not always refer to the Toltec civilization centered at Tula. Since Toltec civilization flourished centuries after Teotihuacan, the people could not have been the city's founders. The city and the archaeological site are located in what is now the San Juan Teotihuacan municipality in the state of Mexico, approximately 25 miles northeast of Mexico City. The site covers a total surface area of 32 square miles. It is the most visited archaeological site in Mexico. Who built Teotihuacan? Its origins are a complete mystery. It was built by hand more than 1,000 years before the arrival of the Aztec in central Mexico. But it was the Aztec descending on the abandoned site, no doubt falling awestruck by what they saw, who gave it the name Teotihuacan. Its age is a mystery. The city is thought to have been established around 100 BC, with major monuments continuously under construction until about 250 AD, but no one knows the actual age of the structure. As far as we know, the pyramids of the sun and moon do not have internal chambers. Therefore, they are monuments rather than buildings. However, a tunnel under the Pyramid of the Sun has been discovered, and researchers have uncovered thousands of ritual objects at the feet of what may be a royal tomb. Guarded by the remains of hundreds of sacrificial bodies, the tunnel entrance remained hidden until researchers from Mexico's National University located it in 2003. They spent years planning the exploration and raising funds before finally reaching the tunnel entrance in 2010. The tunnel appeared to have been closed on purpose by the city's inhabitants. Its entrance, more than 40 feet below ground, was covered with rocks. They found offerings laid before the entrance of 3 chambers at the end of the tunnel, suggesting these are tombs of the elite. The tunnel, hundreds of feet long, follows a route of symbols leading to several sealed funeral chambers that may hold the bodies of ancient rulers. Further research is pending. What will they find when these tombs are finally discovered and opened? Could these hidden chambers hold solid proof of who built Teotihuacan? There are as many theories for the existence of all pyramids worldwide as there are pyramids themselves. One of the most intriguing theories, and the one that is sustained by many facts, is the notion that the pyramids were built, or at least inspired, by aliens. There are 3 possibilities for the existence of these monumental structures. 1. Mankind, either willingly or as slaves, somehow struggled to piece the architecture of these towering structures together, using whatever they had with quarried stones from miles away that they inexplicably moved into place. 2. Mankind had help, either directly or indirectly, to develop the technology to achieve such monumental ventures. Or 3. The structures were not built by man, but were placed on Earth either by an earlier civilization we know nothing about, or an external intelligence from outside the Earth. If man built the pyramids on his own, then we would expect there would be an enormous effort to record such an achievement. However, no culture that had pyramids has any clue how they were built. There are no records of any of the pyramid's construction save some hieroglyphs in Egypt, and those are not detailed. Ramps, stairs, and pulley devices are often mentioned, but these are theories and have little supporting evidence. The truth is, if mankind built any of the pyramids, it is evidence of a technological sophistication that there is no precedence in any known archaeological knowledge base that they could have sustained. They simply did not have the means, knowledge, nor technology to do so. The theory that aliens from another world may have assisted in building the Great Pyramid of Giza in Egypt and other pyramids might explain how some of the most amazing and mysterious engineering feats in human history were accomplished. Moving massive stone blocks, apparently quarried from many miles away, and assembling them into something so colossal and precise seems like an insurmountable task even today. The signs of advanced technology litter the landscape around the Great Pyramids. It is true that the ancient Egyptians could never assemble the 70-ton blocks into pyramids using ramps and pulleys. Evidence within the Great Pyramid and around the Giza Plateau exists if one goes looking for it. Laser-cut crystal bowls, precision-cut stone with angles only advanced machinery could have achieved. Even an advanced battery has been discovered. None of these technologies could have been achieved with basic stone or bronze tools. But what if they had help? For many years now, the idea that aliens may have helped ancient man has been put forth. And from the time in the 1960s when the question was first written by Erich von Däniken, people have found even more evidence to support this theory. Today, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of artifacts that show advanced technology or evidence of advanced tooling. Modern scientists have no idea how they were made or used. Stone blocks cut with laser precision. Huge stones adjoined as if fitted like puzzle pieces together. Signs of metal clamps used to hold blocks to one another. Laser-cut holes with right angles. Gigantic blocks weighing several tons that have been lifted and precisely dropped into place. The list goes on, and this is just in Egypt. Engineers today say none of this could have been achieved without advanced technology, which the ancient Egyptians didn't have. So who did? If mankind did not have the tools or knowledge to create such structures, then the only logical conclusion is he had help, most likely from an extraterrestrial source. Did mankind have help building the pyramids and other monumental structures found around the world? Many scientists and laymen think so. In ancient Mesopotamia, there was a fertile region called Sumner, and a people we refer to as the Sumerians. They had an advanced knowledge of mathematics and architecture, and created some interesting art that still survives to this day. Because of some of the things they left behind, we know the Sumerians revered gods they called the Anunnaki. And not only the Sumerians, apparently other cultures in Mesopotamia knew of these deities as well. The Anunnaki are at the center of a great deal of debate regarding ancient aliens and what exactly the ancient people knew. Much of this stems from the work of Zecharia Sitchin. In the 1970s, after interpreting and studying ancient Sumerian texts, Sitchin realized they revealed stunning information about the origins of the human race. He then wrote several books where he put forth his theories. Sitchin believed the Anunnaki originate from Nibiru, a rogue planet that takes thousands of years to orbit the sun. The Anunnaki were sent here to mine gold to bring back to their home world. When they rebelled against poor working conditions, the decision was made to genetically modify prehistoric humans, Homo erectus, by incorporating Anunnaki DNA and creating a new slave species. Because of this, Homo sapiens were born. The theory is that the Anunnaki built the structures we see today, and that they will one day return to Earth when the planet Nibiru completes its 3,600-year orbit of the Sun. It's hard to imagine how ancient man went from hunter-gatherers to archaeological geniuses in just a few decades. Is it possible that we are the product of genetic development and breeding by ancient aliens? Is there evidence in our own DNA that could prove this is true? A new study presented to a Royal Society meeting on ancient DNA in London in 2014 has revealed a dramatic finding. The genome of one of our ancient ancestors, the Denisovans, contains a segment of DNA that seems to have come from another species that is currently unknown to science. The discovery suggests that there was rampant interbreeding between ancient human species in Europe and Asia more than 30,000 years ago. But far more significant was the finding that they also mated with a mystery species from Asia, one that is neither human nor Neanderthal. A paleoanthropologist at the London Natural History Museum admitted that they don't have the faintest idea what the mystery species could be. Traces of the unknown new genome were detected in 2 teeth and a finger bone of a Denisovan, which was discovered in a Siberian cave. There's not much data available about the appearance of Denisovans due to the lack of their fossils availability, but the geneticists and researchers succeeded in arranging their entire genome very precisely. The question is now, who were these mystery people that the Denisovans were breeding with? And if they bred with an ancient unknown species, did other early cavemen do the same? Could this be evidence of a breeding program carried out in antiquity by ancient aliens? When we think of the pyramids and ancient structures, we assume that we, mankind, must have constructed them for some purpose unknown. If we entertain the notion that we did not build them, then our imagination extends to some external source, such as aliens. However, there is a third possibility that does not include man nor aliens. Consider the possibility that there could have been an intelligent, advanced civilization living on Earth before the human race. Could the ancient structures we marvel at today have been built by a race of people that predate our knowledge of man? There is evidence to suggest that giants once walked the earth and may not have been human. Giant skeletons have been found from the Americas to Europe. Many had a double row of teeth and were 8 to 12 feet tall. The Paiutes, a Native American tribe indigenous to parts of Nevada, Utah, and Arizona, told early white settlers about the ancestors' battles with the ferocious race of white, red-haired giants. According to the Paiutes, the giants were already living in the area. The Paiutes named the giants Sitika, that literally means tool eaters. The tool is a fibrous water plant the giants wove into rafts to escape the Paiutes' continuous attacks. They used the rafts to navigate across what remained of Lake Lahontan. According to the Paiutes, the red-haired giants stood as tall as 12 feet and were a vicious, unapproachable people that killed and ate captured Paiutes as food. The Paiutes told the early settlers that after many years of warfare, all the tribes in the area finally joined together to rid themselves of the giants. Evidence of the giant humans, people 7 to 12 feet tall, still exists in the fossil records. Tools and other artifacts recovered from archaeological digs show giant skeletal remains that awed and sometimes frightened researchers and explorers as far back as the 16th century. 10 and 12-foot humans do not fit dogmatic theories. Usually, when giant skeletons are found, they're laughed off as hoaxes. Unfortunately, orthodox science has too much to lose by investigating the mounds thoroughly. Archaeologists cannot deny that the mound builders are real. What they deny are the things sometimes discovered inside the mounds. Over the past century and a half, it's been revealed again and again that some of the mounds and the small pyramids are the burial grounds of huge men, often 8 feet or taller, and they had a sophisticated culture. Some of the giants have been found wearing intricate leather armor and have been buried with swords. Could these ancient giants that walk the earth be the remnants of a lost civilization of giants that predate modern man? If so, did they have the technology to create the monuments and pyramids we ponder over today? We know little about those giants, but we know a great deal about the architecture of ancient pyramids, and we now know mankind could not have created them. If not ancient giants, then who? The Earth is dotted with historical places featuring pyramids and ancient structures. But the Earth is not the only place you can find pyramids. Mars also has its own pyramid structures. Cydonia is a region on the planet Mars that has attracted both scientific and popular interest. The name originally referred to the albedo feature that was visible from Earthbound telescopes. Cydonia lies in the planet's northern hemisphere in a transitional zone between the heavily cratered regions to the south and relatively smooth plains to the north. Some planetologists believe that the northern plains may once have been ocean beds and that Cydonia may once have been a coastal zone. Cydonia was first imaged in detail by the Viking 1 and Viking 2 orbiters. These images appear to show a human face on Mars. Since it was originally first imaged, the face has been universally accepted as an optical illusion, an example of the psychological phenomenon of pareidolia. After analysis of the higher resolution Mars Global Survey data, NASA stated that a detailed analysis of multiple images of this feature reveals a natural-looking Martian hill, whose illusionary face-like appearance depends on the viewing angle and angle of illumination. However, the face only directed our attention to the area. To the south and east of the face are a number of pyramid structures and also what appears to be a city. Richard Hoagland, a former member of the JPL Press Corps and the author of The Monuments of Mars, has led a long investigation into the Viking data. He and his team have analyzed different photographic frames taken at different angles weeks apart. He claims that he and his researchers have considerable evidence that the face, as well as some nearby pyramid-shaped objects and other artifacts, are the work of sentient creatures. If aliens did impart knowledge or actually create the pyramids on Earth, who is to say they didn't also do it on another planet? Of the three possibilities of pyramid origins, with the discovery of pyramids on Mars, the alien theory is looking much more logical. Why the pyramid shape? Why not square or octagon buildings? If pyramids were supposed to be tombs or simply monuments, why not create them using an easier shape, such as a box? While no clue was left behind as to the reason for the triangle shape, archaeologists have made educated guesses. Some believe that the pyramid shape is representative of the mound of creation. Egyptians believed that the earth was created on an island, which they named the Mound of Creation. The pyramids rising up out of the flat desert might signify this belief. Some believe that the pyramids are shaped in such a way to allow easy passage from this life to the next. The sun was another important part of Egyptian beliefs. To honor and please their sun god, some archaeologists believe that the pyramid's sides represent the rays of the sun. Now, these explanations, of course, assume the Egyptians built the pyramids, but could the pyramids have served another purpose rather than being the tombs of pharaohs? No mummy or pharaoh has ever been found within a pyramid. The notion that they were tombs has no evidence to back it. However, there are many engineering facts regarding the pyramids that do support these structures being a machine of some type. One fascinating theory that fits the facts is that the pyramids were a sound resonance chamber and were used for healing. Sonic experiments performed in the King's Chamber shows that the King's Chamber has a series of acoustic resonance frequencies that correspond with perfect musical notes. The coffer inside the King's Chamber, for instance, has a perfect resonance frequency of 440 Hz, the ground note A, the frequency of a tuning fork. It's no coincidence that the resonance frequencies that were discovered in the King's Chamber correspond with the resonance frequency of our DNA base. The builders of the Great Pyramid must have had a thorough understanding of the human DNA if indeed they were able to attune the king's chamber to DNA frequencies? Is it possible that something as simple as sound frequencies can be used for DNA healing? Resonance frequencies of the king's chamber do correspond with the resonance frequencies that were found in the 4 nucleotides of the DNA molecule. During the last decade, a handful of scientists and researchers have discovered that the Great Pyramids of Egypt and other similar pyramids have unique energetic properties that induce medical benefits for various types of illnesses and ailments. Some researchers claim that pyramids built using sacred geometry has the power to increase the energy frequency of an organism, including the human body. They believe this is possible due to their unique geometric shape. The sacred shape of these pyramids helps absorb electromagnetic energy coming from the Earth, stars, and other planets. It is believed that the electromagnetic waves can actually change the vibrational frequency rate of people, thereby altering their mental, physical, and emotional states. If some pyramids were used for healing, then we must adjust our thinking about them. They were not tombs for the dead, but rather hospitals for the living. Sound and music can completely change a person's mood and has been proven to heal even deadly diagnoses such as cancer. We use sound for healing in modern medicine. Lithotripsy is a procedure that uses shock waves to break up stones in the kidney, bladder, or urethra. High-energy shock waves or sound waves pass through the body until they hit the kidney stones. The waves break the stones into tiny pieces. After the procedure, the tiny pieces of stone pass out of your body in your urine. Is it possible that the sarcophagus within the Great Pyramid was not a sarcophagus at all, but rather a bath whereby a patient received these sound healing practices? If we correct our thinking from tombs to great healing machines, then it makes better sense that enormous efforts were made to create these huge healing devices. Rather than monuments to pharaohs or gods, these were the healing centers of great cities. Indeed, they would have been the most important structure of all ancient cities. Could these pyramid structures found throughout the world be evidence of either our or some civilization's advanced knowledge of medicine? Are the pyramids functional healing devices? And could they still work today? We do not have the technology to build Great Pyramid monuments today. Even our best engineering cranes and lifting machines cannot set 70-ton blocks precisely into place. However, smaller pyramids have been built and do show unusual electromagnetic properties. Pyramid energy has been found to preserve fruits and vegetables, sharpen razor blades, and charge batteries. But these are parlor tricks compared to the power and possibility of these unique machines. Imagine if we could rediscover the possibilities of pyramid power. How would it change and enhance our society? A Canadian hospital tried using a pyramid in their burn ward. The results were that after being under the pyramid for a few minutes, the patient's pain started to reduce. They also found that burned areas healed much faster. Egyptologists have found well-preserved grain in tombs that is thousands of years old. In sharp contrast, grains stored in modern silos usually spoils after only a few seasons of storage. Grain in modern silos usually keeps no longer than 4 years. Careful study reveals several unique and beneficial qualities that may be derived from pyramid meditation. Experienced meditators relate profound results in their quest for expanded awareness. Many people feel that psychic powers are stimulated or heightened by the use of pyramids. Psychics who use pyramids in this fashion have achieved an altered state of consciousness more rapidly than they would have otherwise. Placed on the head, focusing through the chakra system during meditation sessions, clearing psychic passages which may have been blocked. The pyramid is a geometric amplifier which increases the power of prayer or strengthens the spiritual request of a religious devotee. Testimonials from several sources demonstrate that pets of all kinds thrive under or within open-frame pyramids. Dogs and cats are observed to respond to the pyramids. There is also a slowing or complete stopping of the growth of microorganisms. Recent advances in Kirlian photography show the human aura to be significantly brighter after a 15-minute exposure period within a pyramid. Is this evidence of the healing and preservation power of pyramids? And why are we not using this power in modern medicine? Did ancient man have knowledge of advanced spiritual and medical procedures? Or could this power have been in common usage by some ancient civilization whose existence is lost in antiquity? Healing powers may not be the only characteristics of the pyramids. Could the pyramids themselves be blatantly pointing to where this knowledge came from? All pyramid structures around the world are situated towards a specific stellar alignment. The relative positions of 3 main ancient Egyptian pyramids on the Giza Plateau are by design correlated with the relative positions of the 3 stars in the constellation of Orion, which make up Orion's belt, as these stars appeared in 10,000 BC. The orientation of the Teotihuacan pyramid structure may hold some anthropological significance. The pyramid is oriented slightly northwest of the horizon point of the setting sun on 2 days a year, August 12th and April 29th, which are about 1 divinatory calendar year apart for the Teotihuacanos. The day of August 12th is significant because it would have marked the date of the beginning of the present era and the initial day of the Maya long count calendar. In addition, many important astrological events can be viewed from the location of the pyramid that are important in terms of both agriculture and belief systems of the ancient society. The Chinese pyramid of Zhanyang matches the constellation of Gemini, including the star Betelgeuse from the neighboring constellation of Orion. Also, the pyramid matches the brightest star in Taurus, Aldebaran. A study of the sky dating back to 10,500 BC finds the constellation of Gemini is rising on the spring equinox on that date, with the pyramids matching the sky at sunrise. These pyramids appear to have similar alignments to Teotihuacan and Giza. What are the odds all of these pyramids having this one unique galactic alignment? Surely this cannot be a coincidence. Is it possible that all the known pyramids were built by the same people, or were inspired by their advanced knowledge? A further study of the Xianyang Chinese pyramid results in many unique facts. Chinese pyramids are ancient mausoleums and burial mounds said to have been built to house the remains of several early emperors of China and their imperial relatives. About 38 of them are located around 22 miles northwest of Xi'an on the Qinshan Plains of Shanxi Province. The most famous is the mausoleum of the first Qin emperor, northeast of Xi'an, where the terracotta warriors were found. They have flat tops and thus are more similar in shape to the Teotihuacan pyramids than to the pyramids in Egypt. Although known in the West for at least a century, their existence has been made controversial by sensationalist publicity and the problems of Chinese archaeology in early 20th century. Very little is known about these Chinese pyramids because of government secrecy. In fact, the Chinese government has planted trees on some in an attempt to hide them. What kind of construction are these pyramids? Some of the pyramids are currently in very poor condition, as they were plundered by the local citizens. The pyramids are mostly built of loam and soil. Some farmers destroyed the pyramids to take the loam and soil to their fields and use them in their farms. The heights of the pyramids, situated in the Sichuan Plains, are about 25 to 100 meters, with the exception of only one pyramid situated to the north of the rest of the constructions. It is the so-called Great White Pyramid, which is said to be about 300 meters high. This pyramid can be truly called the mother of all Chinese pyramids. Recently, the Chinese authorities declared the area where the Great White Pyramid stands a closed region, as a launching pad for rockets is situated in that region. According to an old Chinese legend, over 100 pyramids built in China are evidence of visits paid by aliens to our planet. The first record of the pyramids was written over 5,000 years ago. Therefore, it is very likely that they are even older. The Chinese emperors themselves insisted that they were ancestors of the sons of the sky who had landed on Earth in iron dragons. Aliens are alleged to have been the constructors of the pyramids. The Chinese pyramids resemble the pyramids in Central America. Is it possible that the South American pyramids were also constructed by these sons of the sky? If we look around the locations of monuments and pyramids, we find a multitude of unusual artifacts, from alien-looking drawings to actual mechanical devices. There are some very strange hieroglyphics in the Temple of Osiris at Abydos. According to many UFO enthusiasts and Atlantis proponents, these glyphs depict highly developed craft. Specifically, a helicopter, a submarine, some form of flying saucer, and a jet airplane. What are these inscriptions all about? If the ancient Egyptians had vehicles such as helicopters, submarines, and jet airplanes, one would expect to find some evidence of this other than in a single inscription on the lintel of a single temple. Could this evidence be buried in the sands of time in Egypt? Or could it have all been destroyed by various invaders in the region over time due to fear or misunderstanding of the purpose of these craft? Within the Giza Pyramid, one of the air shafts has been explored by a robot. The shaft led to a wall or barrier. Scientists know there is a chamber beyond this block sealing the tunnel, but no one knows what is inside the chamber. Could this compartment hold secrets to ancient technology? Recently, a new tunnel has been discovered that runs under the Pyramid of the Sun in Mexico. A years-long exploration of a tunnel sealed almost 2,000 years ago at the ancient city of Teotihuacan yielded thousands of relics and the discovery of 3 chambers that could hold more important finds. Unlike at other pre-Columbian ruins in Mexico, archaeologists have never found any remains belonging to the Teotihuacan rulers. Such a discovery could help shine light on the leadership structure of the city, including whether rule was hereditary. It could also reveal ancient technology. Much has been written about the Baghdad Battery discovered in Iraq, a clay jar that appears to be able to generate electricity. From metal clasps and precision drilling found at Pumapunka, and stone puzzle blocks that fit together with mathematical precision, to perfectly engineered crystal bowls and stone found in Egypt, the technology found within and around the pyramids are astonishing. Scientists have no clue how these artifacts were made or manufactured. They propose theories, but most cannot be quantified. If ancient man did construct these anomalies, how did they do it? Certainly not with chisels and bronze instruments. Many of these artifacts appear laser-etched or drilled with advanced cutting tools. Some are more precise than we can achieve with the latest modern technology ourselves. Understand that most of these artifacts are cut into granite or brittle stone and quartz. Even with modern technology, this is a very difficult, if not impossible, substance to cut precisely. According to conventional Egyptology, the ancients responsible for these structures were only equipped with simple chisels and manually turned tube and bow drills. Are these results really possible by hand? Not to mention the countless perfect squares, rectangles, circles, smoothly polished surfaces, contoured angles also found at these sites. If the ancients had developed such technology on their own, surely they would have preserved such knowledge. Yet we are left to ponder just how such feats were achieved. It is far more likely that man did not have this knowledge and technology, or they were supervised in the use of such technology. Ancient man, aliens, or a lost civilization predating our history. Where did the monuments of old come from? We know they were far more advanced for hunter-gatherers barely out of the caves to have invented. The idea and inspiration to build such gigantic structures must have been inspired by some intelligence far beyond early man's conceptual abilities. Did man have help? Were these enormous archaeological constructs built by or overseen by ancient aliens with technology far advanced even by our own modern knowledge? Could a civilization predating our own have had such technology and built these monuments that remain to be marveled over even into our history? Or did we somehow attain the knowledge and technology ourselves to build such structures, only to lose it somewhere in the mist of time? We may never know the origins of pyramids and ancient structures. Time will eventually erode and fade even the largest and strongest of them. But at some point in our future, perhaps we will open a long-lost tomb, and there we will find the answers to all the questions we currently have about these ancient archaeological marvels.
In 1968, Eric von Däniken asked the ancient alien question in a book called Chariots of the Gods. It became an international bestseller, and basically ever since he has put a challenge to science to come up with an answer as to whether or not we were alone in the past. 40 years on, the answer is still open, and scientists are refusing to look at whether or not we have been visited in the past. The question is, were we alone? The question remains, were we alone? But in this DVD, I hope to really get to the point of this question and provide an answer which says, yes, we were not alone. When Eric von Däniken posed the question, various topics began to come to the forefront. One of the most famous ones were the Nazca lines. The Nazca lines are in Peru, and they are a system of lines and geoglyphs on the ground. At the time, very few people were interested. In fact, it was a lone woman called Maria Reiki who almost single-handedly was trying to get these places preserved. When Eric therefore focused his attention on the Nazca lines and asked whether these were signs of ancient aliens who might have come to planet Earth, basically pandemonium descended on her domain. When you start looking at the Nazca lines in detail, you will find that very few of them are really landing strips, as Eric posed the question. It simply cannot be. They are geoglyphs, they are inches of scraped surface which have revealed the underlying code, and as such, really are not a landing strip at all. But the basic question which Eric was asking was this: should they be seen from the sky? Should they be seen from above? Well, scientists, after Eric posed the question, began to study the Nazca lines, and what they found was that really they were part of a larger civilization, even one which had pyramids. But there was no room, of course, for an airport or an ancient space dock. But what some scientists are looking at right now is indeed this question: should they not be seen from above? Because really only from above can they be seen from the perspective that they are designed to be. And the answer is yes. There has been evidence so far which suggests that some of the scarring of the rock means that these rocks were very close to heat. And the heat has been there because of hot air balloons. In short, it's believed, and it is proposed by scientists, that the Nazca lines were indeed supposed to be seen from the sky. Not by ancient extraterrestrial beings, but by us ourselves, by our civilization which had far more advanced knowledge, which had hot air balloons, and which, with these hot air balloons, they could see the geoglyphs from the sky. In the case of Nazca, it might appear that von Däniken has been debunked, but really what he has shown is that our ancestors were indeed far more superior, technologically speaking, than in 1968 we were giving them credit for. The other artifact which von Däniken focused on was the Palenque coffin. This is a coffin of Lord Pakal. and it's situated in a pyramid. Basically, the question was, when you turn it 90 degrees around, does this not look as if Lord Pakal is riding some kind of air scooter? Of course, the question is very tantalizing, but when we start looking at the Palenque tomb, we really see that we cannot just turn it 90 degrees as we want it to be. Instead, what has been identified since 1968 once again, and pretty much because of von Daniken's prodding, is that we now know that this is a scene depicting Lord Pakal descending into the underworld. He is falling into the underworld at the World Tree. So once again, von Daniken posed a question. The answer seems to be no, but in trying to answer the question, science has really found an answer to what Lord Pakal really was being symbolized at his tombstone. Out of the 237 questions which von Daniken posed, some have been proven to be a no. But it doesn't necessarily mean that in finding the answer, which is a negative, that he didn't contribute to science. Early on, people like Joseph Blumrich began to look at von Daniken's material. And Blumrich was a NASA engineer, and basically he went in search of details which he felt he could easily debunk. And so when von Daniken is talking about the description of Ezekiel and wonders whether what Ezekiel is seeing in the Bible is actually a spaceship, Blumrich felt he was right at home and was going to basically destroy von Daniken's reputation. Well, what happened next is a story which Blumrich loves telling. Basically what happened was this. Blumrich went in search of further details as to what Ezekiel had found, and basically a few years later Blumrich published a book called The Spaceship of Ezekiel. What Blumrich was finding and identifying was that everything which von Daniken said about Ezekiel he could verify and back up. And basically what he was doing was showing that von Daniken had only touched the surface, and that within the writings of Ezekiel in the Bible there were further details which highlighted the possibility that what Ezekiel had seen was indeed a spaceship. All of this to suggest that really the question which von Daniken posed in 1968 has received an awful lot of controversy, but we also need to move into broader aspects and introduce new material, because so much has changed since then, and really that needs to rise to the surface right now. The big question when it comes to the ancient alien question is whether they are a substitute for God. It's a question which an awful lot of people would really say maybe. And definitely it's a possibility, even though I personally believe that we should really disentangle the two topics. Ancient alien theorists have looked at cargo cults, and basically cargo cults are a relatively new phenomenon. What happened was this: at the time of the Second World War, southern Pacific islands got an enormous amount of American soldiers in the War of the South Pacific. And so what happened was that all of a sudden the natives of islands like Tana basically were given an awful lot of goods, and their island was transformed into a military basis. After the Second World War, everybody left. And basically the island once again felt that these people should come back. And this is where the idea of a cargo cult comes about. Because what happened next was that the runways were being reconstructed out of reed. The planes which the American soldiers had was reconstructed out of wheat. And basically a concept came about that there had been this civilizing deity which they identified with John Froome, and they really were beginning to implore him to return and bring back this golden age. And this is something which we see in an awful lot of cultures, whether it is Quetzalcoatl in the Mayan heartland, Viracocha with the Incas, Osiris with the ancient Egyptians. All of these deities which somehow brought him civilization have always been said to return, and to some extent were also implored to return, because they were going to return a golden age to the various civilizations, whether they were the Mayans, the Incans, or the ancient Egyptians. And what we're seeing is that a physical contact, a physical deity in the southern Pacific indeed made it into a god. And there's a funny aftermath to this, because some time later, they heard stories about Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, and basically they began to work him into the mythology of this John Froome. They said he was the cousin or the brother of John Froome, and they actually began to identify him as a deity and began to send letters to him and began to consider him to be as one of their tribe, even though, of course, he has nothing to do with the people of the South Pacific. The interesting aspect is that eventually they were able to bypass royal protocol and send a letter to the Duke of Edinburgh, and basically he returned it signed with a photograph, signed as well. And the people of Vanuatu and other South Pacific islands are now worshipping Prince Philip as a deity. And it just goes you to show that indeed certain people can be deified, and certain alien people, not necessarily alien in the sense that they were extraterrestrial, but definitely that they had nothing to do with the indigenous culture as such, transformed the civilization, and once they left, really left a religious framework in place. That, to some extent, is what the ancient alien theory is proposing as well, that there were contact with intelligences which are either human, non-human, physical or non-physical, but definitely outside of the scope of a civilization, and that there are traces in the myths, the legends, and the stories of these civilizations which show that contact had been established with somebody alien to the indigenous tribe. So let us go into the best evidence for finding out whether or not ancient contact has been made with our ancestors. Well, we need to start with the only surviving monument of the Seven Wonders, the Great Pyramid. People will tell you that the Great Pyramid could not possibly have been built by mankind, and that is to some extent simply not true. Our ancestors were definitely capable of building it. The really intriguing question is whether they did, and whether there is evidence within the building of the Great Pyramid of signs that they were using technology which was not commonly available to them. And the answer to that question is yes. Basically, the story of the Great Pyramid is the story of a French physicist, chemist, Joseph Davidovich. He is considered to be the father of geopolymerization. And basically, geopolymers is the following thing. The science of geopolymerization is that Davidovich was looking to natural rocks and basically realized that these were formed over a certain period of time, from days to sometimes millennia to sometimes millions of years. It's a chemical process, and so he wondered whether, if he used the same ingredients, he could use chemical processes to speed up the rock formation, and basically do this in his laboratory. And so he set out to find out whether he could do that, and the answer was a positive. He managed to do so, hence why he became the father of geopolymerization. He has a record, as curriculum vitae, which is longer than most books. But a few years ago, he basically began to see that what was happening in ancient Egypt was very much on par with what he had seen in his laboratory. When Davidovich looked at the blocks of the Great Pyramid, he realized that they had not been hewn from a quarry. He realized that they were the result of geopolymerization, that they were geopolymers. And so what he did was he began to do a detailed investigation. And when he felt that he was ready to publish it, he also made the Egyptologists aware. What happened next was something of a farcical comedy, because Egyptologists basically said that they knew that what Davidovich was saying was simply not true. The Great Pyramid was not made from cement, because geopolymers in Egyptological circles are quite often mistaken for cement, and it's clearly not the case. Cement is cement, geopolymers are natural rocks, but just through a speeded up process. And so what he did was that he sent in a piece of geopolymer for chemical analysis, and the laboratories which the Egyptological circles use sent back a report saying that it was a natural rock, to which his reply was, well, that's not the case. It is a piece of rock which I created in my laboratory, and it goes to show that your analysis of my research is basically incorrect. Where it stands at the moment is that Davidovich is slowly beginning to get ahead in convincing Egyptological circles of his right. But the interesting thing is this: Davidovich is showing us that a process which was only discovered in the 1970s was also in use in the ancient Egyptian times, and then disappeared. The interesting aspect is that from ancient Egyptian times we have records which show us that they knew who was responsible for pyramid building processes. His name is Imhotep, and he really was deified by the ancient Egyptians themselves. Imhotep says that the knowledge through which he was able to construct pyramids was given to him by non-human intelligences. And so we have clear evidence to suggest that the ancient Egyptians were indeed right in saying that they were not alone, that they were guided on this process of civilization. And the Great Pyramid is just one example as to how they were guided in this process along the lines of deities, non-human intelligences helping them out. Another favorite place of mine is Baalbek in the Bekaa Valley in the Lebanon. It's not hot on the tourist list right now, basically because it is in such a volatile region. Baalbek is composed of a temple of Jupiter, which was built in Roman times, and it is actually the largest Roman temple outside of Rome. When you are asking historians as to how the ancient Romans built this temple, they will tell you that that moment in time they really were stretched in their technical capabilities in constructing this temple. But it's not the temple, but the platform on which the temple sits that is the enigma. Here we find stone blocks which are thousands of tons in weight. In fact, the tallest one, the largest one, weighs just under 2,000 tons. At the end of the 20th century, construction engineers were able to work with such weights. There were machines which could lift this amount of weight, but there were no machines 10 years ago which could transport this weight. Yet we know for a fact that the engineers of Baalbek thousands of years ago were able to transport this. Now, how are historians dealing with this anomaly? They're basically leaving it unaddressed, as if there is no problem there. But clearly, when we have only just gotten the technology to move these stones into place, and we know for a fact that the ancient engineers of Baalbek were able to transport this, then there is a question to be answered there. Karnak in Brittany is another famous example. Here we have thousands of standing stones aligned in neat rows. We are unable to really give any insights as to what they were there for. Karnak is part of the megalithic civilization, and this is how far as science has gone. They have identified that the people who built these stones were people who built these stones, because a megalith really is a tall stone. Well, in the case of Karnak, there are explorations as to what these might all be about. First of all, they have been identified as being aligned to things like the summer solstice, the winter solstice, the equinoxes, to certain important standstills of the moon. So we know for a fact that there was some kind of technical capability in constructing these. It is thanks to the work of Howard Crowhurst, who really has gone into an extraordinary detail into Karnak, that we begin to identify certain components. First of all, he's been able to identify that an awful lot of mathematical skill went into these things. That these stones were not just simply placed haphazardly, but that they were really placed according to a mathematical sequence. Furthermore, that the distances and the alignments of the various megalithic rows in Karnak also were not just done by coincidence, but that they were done in a very specific pattern. So what we're getting here is thousands of stones which were aligned in very specific rows, but for which science has not found an answer. But what we do know is that there was extraordinary amounts of engineering in these stone rows. And this is to some extent another example of where we find that our ancestors were far more technically capable, but also mathematically aware than we give them credit for. For example, such things as pi and phi did not officially exist in megalithic times. The discovery of these mathematical equations are only credited to the Greeks. But we find that the megalith builders of Karnak were definitely aware of them. So what we see here really is once again an example of a fact that science is unable to address something which is physically present. And it is once again a question for science as to how they are going to explain this. Now, in the case of Karnak, the question remains whether this is an ancient alien connection or whether it is more a lost civilization connection. And to some extent, at this moment in time, that question has to remain open. One of the gimmicks of the ancient alien theory has to be crystal skulls. The crystal skulls are awe-inspiring, and nobody really knows how they were made. Well, we can reproduce them today, but not necessarily all skulls. Some of them stand out, and two stand out more than others. One of them is Max. Max is a crystal skull which is composed out of 6 different types of crystal. And it is said that whoever began to work with this crystal, if we were to do it today, basically Max would shatter into thousands of pieces. But somehow in the past somebody has been able to form Max, and the end result is still there. Max, unfortunately, is not as famous as the Mitchell-Hedges skull. The Mitchell-Hedges skull is one of the very few ancient skulls which has a detachable jaw. When Anna Mitchell-Hedges took her skull to Hewlett-Packard Laboratories, they identified that really this was a piece of engineering which today we cannot do. The problem is that the jaw is made of the same piece of crystal, and so for that to work, really we need to identify a piece of technology which we currently do not have, because every piece of technology today is unable to reproduce this. It is said that it would shatter, but basically we have no idea how to do this. HP said that if it was done through human work, it would really have taken 75 years, probably 3 people, each 20 years to do this, day in, day out, to get this end result. It is really impossible to believe that this was the case. Now, the Mitchell-Hedges skull has also come in for some scrutiny and for some skepticism. Jane Walsh of the Smithsonian is absolutely convinced that the Mitchell-Hedges skull was made at the end of the 19th century in Germany. Fortunately or unfortunately, she has been unable to produce any evidence to back up her conclusion, however vociferous she is in proclaiming it. It is true that there is some controversy as to where Mitchell-Hedges got his crystal skull from. The story goes that Anna Mitchell-Hedges, on the 1st of January 1917, her 17th birthday, that she identified the skull amongst other pieces in the ruins of a Mayan citadel. There is no archaeological evidence to back that up. It is even said that she probably wasn't there. But this doesn't necessarily mean that the skull is indeed of origins from Germany or elsewhere, that this is a modern fake. In fact, the answer can be found in White Tiger, which is a book which Mitchell-Hedges wrote as a novel. But many aspects of the novel really show that what he's doing here is putting out non-fiction under the guise of fiction. And basically the story of White Tiger is this. An English expat is living in Mexico and comes across a tribe. The tribe takes him in, and after a period of time begins him to show secrets. Part of these secrets involve a huge treasure. And in White Tiger, which is the nickname of this English expat, after a while, White Tiger goes with the high priest into the vault which is said to contain the treasure of the Aztecs. And after a series of pushing against walls revealing doors, he finally sees in front of him the treasure of the Aztecs. And in it, he says, are crystal heads. Now, Mitchell Hedges writes this book in 1931, and it's only 1947-ish that he begins to take the crystal skull out for public displays. And really, when you reconstruct Mitchell Hedges' life, you begin to realize that indeed there is a period of his time, 1912, 1914, that he was living the life of White Tiger, that he was making contact with these indigenous tribes, and that it is likely that it is at that moment in time that he was given the crystal skull for preservation. After a few decades, he really felt confident enough to take it out on the road and show it to people. It appears that because it was such a mysterious circumstance, such a privileged circumstance in which he was given these crystal skulls, that Anna Mitchell Hedges then invented the story as to how she discovered it. Because if the story of White Tiger is true, then it is not just one crystal skull which Mitchell Hedges has. There were really several crystal skulls still hiding, probably to this day, together with other treasures of the Mayan population somewhere within the Mayan heartland. And so a white lie was invented basically to protect the people from that region against treasure seekers. One of the best examples has to come from the Bible, and it is the story of the Watchers. In Genesis itself, it says that non-human beings came down to earth and began to mate with females. The end result was a race of giants, but also that the creatures which were born were so big that quite often the women could not give birth to it because basically the pelvis was not wide enough for the heads of these creatures. Now, that might sound a lot like science fiction, but why would it make it into Genesis? What if it is a religious message? What is the religious message really there for? And when you start looking into the archaeological evidence, you will find that this is actually not something which is typical to the Bible. It is actually a tradition which dates back to Sumerian times. And what we have are stories of the Nephilim, other creatures which are said to have descended from heaven to earth to mate with mankind. And so what we see is evidence from various cultures, but present in the Western Bible as well, which shows that so many traditions in the Middle East had a clear knowledge and belief that they at one point had been visited. This is not just something which can be pushed aside, because there is also archaeological evidence in various locations, in fact on various continents, to show that there seems to be a race of giants. Giant skulls were found, for example, in Lovelock, Nevada. And it shows you that the giants which were described in the Bible are not just stories, are not just myths, but are also archaeological. They have left a trace in our archaeological records. And it is really up to us to begin to analyze whether or not all of these interrelate, whether these giants on the New World were linked with the giants on the Old World, and whether indeed they are of non-human origins, or whether they are a sort of lost species of planet Earth. Now, what is the best evidence? And the best evidence, according to Carl Sagan, is actually a story of Oannes. The story of Oannes is very interesting, and it is recorded by Berossus. Berossus is a person who lived in Greek times and who was reporting on events which took place in Babylonian times. The story of Oannes is this, that a creature which was half fish, half man, came from the Persian Gulf and began to speak, if not instruct, with the locals. He taught them sciences such as astronomy, mathematics. At night he would disappear once again into the Persian Gulf, and the next morning, or a few days later, he would emerge from there again and continue his education. After a certain period of time, Oannes would stop coming, and a little while later, somebody else would come, another creature, half fish, half man. And that creature knew precisely where Oannes had left off, and he took it up from there. This continued for a series of 7 such creatures, which in the Babylonian tradition and in the Sumerian tradition are known as the Apkallu, the 7 sages who basically brought civilization to the Babylonians and to the Sumerians. So what we have here is very clear evidence that the Babylonians say that civilization was a gift of the gods, that it was a non-human intelligence, a half-fish, half-man, a creature called Oannes, who gave it to them. That they were taught civilization, that civilization was a gift of the gods. This story of Oannes was actually identified by the late Carl Sagan as the best evidence available that we have been contacted in the past by non-human intelligences, which were clearly in this case in a physical form, and clearly of a description which makes them very much a candidate for being of extraterrestrial origins. The dropper, as they're called, are believed to have been the result of a spacecraft which crashed in 12,000 BC. Now, really this sounds an extraordinary story, doesn't it? And the story goes as this. In 1962, a Chinese scientist was able to decode inscriptions which had been found during a scientific expedition in the 1920s. And what he said he identified in these inscriptions was that a spacecraft had indeed landed in 12,000 BC, that it had made contact with the local people, and that a second spacecraft a few thousand years later had also crashed in that region. The survivors of that spacecraft basically settled and began to interbreed with locals. Now, the first question is, of course, is it possible that an extraterrestrial civilization can interbreed with mankind? And it is something which we'll come back to. But let's assume for the moment that the answer is yes. Well, the story then continues that the end result was a human being which looked human but with certain specific features, specifically very strong bones of the head with deep inset eyes. The story of the dropper might remain there had it not been for the work of a German tour operator called Hartwig Hausdorff. And in the early 1990s, he was able to go into China and speak to the people involved. And what he came back with was a story that really confirms everything of the original account. What he identified was that the jade discs on which these inscriptions had been found do exist. In fact, jade discs are quite common. The story, of course, has not been verified, but here is what we know. We know that in 1997, the Chinese government began to do a detailed study. They were basically mapping everybody in China and identifying tribes. The end result is that in the land near where the dropper were said to have crashed, there were evidences there of tribes which were very different from anywhere else in China. The features which they describe are very much on par with the descriptions of the dropper. And of course, Chinese scientists since 1997 have been trying to explain as to why this tribe looks so strange. Their explanation is that really what had happened there is that some form of contamination, maybe lead poisoning, in the past was the contributing factor as to why these people look so weird. But really, other scientists have been able to say that this is simply not the case. Lead poisoning kills people, it doesn't cause genetic mutations or genetic transformations. So, whatever these people are, they are indeed posing an anomaly, and scientists in China are actually trying to explore that mystery as we speak. Now, the problem with the Chinese Roswell is that some people believe this is a hoax. They say that David Agamemnon in Sun Gods in Exile in 1978 wrote this book which he pretended was non-fiction. It's a story about an archaeologist who in 1947 goes on an expedition into the Bayan Kara Ula homeland and stumbles upon verification of the story of the stone discs of Bayan Kara Ula. Later on, David Agamemnon basically said that this was an invention, that he had dressed up fiction as non-fiction. Certain people believe that the Chinese Roswell is a myth, that it has been debunked. They argue that a book in 1978 called Sun Gods in Exile is responsible for this myth. Indeed, Sun God in Exile was published in 1978 and uses the material of the stone discs of Bain Karaula, and it injects the story of an expedition in 1947. A person basically goes to the Bain Karaula region and finds corroborating evidence for the stone discs and the space crash story. David Agamemnon, who wrote this book, afterwards said that even though the book pretended to be non-fiction, he had largely made it up. And so skeptics are pointing out that the entire story of the Chinese Roswell goes back to this story of 1978 and that therefore we should simply discard it. Unfortunately, that's absolutely not the case. Hartwig Hausdorff and various other people have been able to identify that the story goes back to 1962. They have found evidence in 1962 newspapers in Germany which relate the story, 16 years before Sun God in Exile was published. 1962 is also the time when, of course, the Chinese professor was said to have made this discovery, this breakthrough. And so the question really should be asked is this: did in 1962 this professor indeed make this breakthrough, and was this somehow reported into West German magazines at that moment? The answer seems to be a straightforward yes. The question is, of course, where these stone discs are and what happened to these Chinese professors. That is something which is there for the future. But once again, all the evidence which we are exploring when it comes to the Chinese Roswell, each case, the evidence is suggesting that it is true, that something happened. And we have people living there right now, descendants of the dropper, who we can go and get DNA from and really answer the question as to whether or not these people were indeed human, non-human intelligences, hybrids. So we have various pockets of information from the archaeological, mythological, historical framework. And really the question then is, can we extrapolate from this? Are there big theories which we can substantiate? Do we know where ET came from? Do we know what they did in the past? Certain people like David Icke, Zechariah Sitchin, others have said, yes, we can. One specific person, Robert Temple, wrote about the Dogon tribe who live in Mali. He basically said that when he analyzed his findings on this tribe, that they were an example of a tribe who had contact with an extraterrestrial intelligence. He believed that they possessed information about Sirius A, B, and C, which they couldn't have gathered through normal means. He basically argued that they had been given this information through contact with non-human intelligences. ET had told them this. Now, when other scientists, and specifically anthropologists, made contact with the Dogon tribe, what they identified was that the information which Temple presented was really not as strong as it should be. The people who the anthropologists, specifically Griol and Dieterlen, spoke to in the early part of the 20th century, some of them were still alive, and they basically said that the anthropologists had mistaken or misidentified some of the information which the tribe elders had given to them. Now, when it comes to Sitchin, it is an entirely different matter. Sitchin will tell you that he perfectly knows where the ancient aliens came from. He says that they come from a planet called Nibiru, which he identifies as the 12th planet in our solar system. He says that Nibiru has a very specific orbit, that its orbit really is 3,600 years, and that the planet is sometimes close to the Sun and sometimes very far from the Sun. He says that these people came to planet Earth to get gold, which they needed, their home planet, and also that they created mankind specifically as a slave labor force to work in the gold mines, specifically the gold mines of Africa, specifically of South Africa.
He also believes that this contact was established several hundreds of thousands of years ago. The problem with Sitchin is this. Sitchin in the 1970s was saying that everybody else was mistranslating Sumerian languages, that he alone was able to understand and read Sumerian, and that therefore we should stick with his interpretation of the Sumerian language. What Sitchin is failing to say is that really the ancient Sumerians had a lexicon. We today have a lexicon of Sumerian words, which basically means that we can go and check specifically a Sumerian word and what they mean. That there is a definition left to us by the ancient Sumerians. And so the words that Sitchin is highlighting, for example Mu or Shem, which he interprets as a spaceship or a spacecraft, really are no such thing. It is a completely different meaning, which the ancient Sumerians gave to these words themselves. So we know that Sitchin is definitely somewhat wrong. But specifically what I felt was really upsetting was that when I started to fact-check some of Sitchin's claims. For example, I was very personally interested in a story about how certain glass remains in the Sinai desert could potentially be evidence of an ancient explosion. Sitchin was talking about this, and I felt that I should really explore this, because if this were the case, it would be amongst the best evidences. Because we all know that atomic warfare and atomic explosion could only mean one thing: a high technologically advanced civilization which either completely disappeared, or an extraterrestrial incident, an extraterrestrial encounter. And what we know, that there are Sumerian accounts such as the one of Owanis, which is after all one of the best examples of contact with a non-human intelligence, I felt that I had to explore. Well, Sitchin in one of his books basically says that there is a scientific publication which details these glass remains in the Sinai desert. And he says that the paper clearly identifies that nobody knows how this happened, and that it is unexplainable to some extent. Fortunately, the scientific paper was available on the internet, so I had an easy download, and even in the summary it is clear that a completely different picture emerges than the one which Sitchin is painting. The scientific paper basically says that this material comes from a volcanic explosion. And so whereas Sitchin is saying and making us believe that there is no information whatsoever as to how this glass material came about, scientific paper makes it very clear that this is the result of a volcanic explosion. The only question which the scientific paper leaves is that it is unable as to which specific explosion out of 3 potential candidates this glass material has originated from. So I'm somewhat, if not extremely upset with Sitchin, because there is no possible means that he could have misinterpreted this summary. And all of his other evidence really does suggest that his theories is just that. It's a theory. And when we start digging deeper, really what we are finding are holes. So at this moment in time, the ancient alien question really does not have an answer which is all-encompassing. There is substantial evidence out there which suggests that our ancestors were indeed in contact with extraterrestrial beings. They themselves believe so, so it is definitely not derogatory to think that some of our civilizations were not just simply due to our ancestors, but due to outside factors. But the question is, are we as a species extraterrestrials ourselves? Really, a very interesting example of alien life came about during the research phase of the ancient alien question. We seem to be aliens ourselves.
Chandra Wickramasinghe is a professor who studied under Sir Fred Hoyle, and basically what he is saying is that since 1982 there has been a conspiracy of silence to squash any dissent which argues that life has originated on planet Earth. He's saying that since 1982 there is actually substantial amount of evidence that life has originated elsewhere in the universe, and in fact that there is evidence to suggest that life could not possibly have originated on planet Earth. This somehow primordial soup which is deemed to be responsible for the origins of life on Earth do not wash, and there are experiments dating back to the 19th century which show as such. Now, since 1982, Wickramasinghe is saying that viruses are most potentially also of extraterrestrial origin. But the big focus has been on NASA. In 1996, they went public with evidence that there was life on a meteorite from Mars. And in December 2010, they also helped a professor called Wolf Simon in her proclamation of evidence, really alien evidence. And in December of 2010, NASA also helped Wolf Simon publish her accounts as to how in Mono Lake she has found evidence of a life form which defies everything we understand life on planet Earth to be. She's not saying it is alien life, but it is really alien in the sense that it is so weird. Now, NASA is very close to finding evidence of extraterrestrial life. They feel confident that within the next 15 to 20 years they will do so. NASA was trying to pick up signs of intelligence life on radio astronomy with SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Life. Today, they have changed tack. They believe that astrobiology is actually the best means of identifying life on planets outside the solar system. For this, they have launched things like the Kepler telescope. And when it was launched in 2010, a year later, by February 2011, they have already identified 54 planets on which they suspect that further exploration of those systems will identify life. So 15 to 20 years is really very close. But NASA has gone further. In their laboratories, they have actually recreated interstellar space. And when they did so, they found that the building blocks of life, DNA and RNA, are spontaneously being created there. They have gone as far as to say that life in the universe is a cosmic imperative. The conclusions which NASA is revealing suggest that life in the universe is everywhere, and that this life is very much like ours. It is DNA based. And so whenever we are confronted with stories from myths and legends that somehow our ancestors were able to interbreed with non-human intelligences, ancient aliens, we should really be looking towards the very latest research coming from within NASA to suggest that this is indeed absolutely possible. NASA is currently paving the way to identify that our ancient myths are absolutely true. So we're being confronted with, on the one side, NASA, who's helping us answer the ancient alien question. They are confident that within the next 15 years or so, they are going to find evidence of alien life somewhere outside of this planet. They're showing us that DNA is a cosmic imperative. And when we look at the archaeological record, there are clear signs that ancient aliens are not a figment of our imagination, or maybe our ancestors' imagination, but that they are genuine possibilities. On the other hand, we have science who's basically refusing to address the issue. Now, when it comes to the possibility of ancient alien contact with our ancestors, Duncan Loonan, a Scottish astronomer, made a statistical analysis. And he is showing us that in the period of time from roughly 5000 BC to now, there should be 3 or 4 potential contacts with our ancestors of ancient aliens. 3 or 4. So out of 240 questions which Eric von Däniken posed, out of the various potentials, whether they are crystal skulls, whether they are the evidence of Baalbek, and specifically the story of Oannes, only 3 or 4 need to be true. all the other ones are likely going to be discarded as either evidence of a higher civilization which was present on Earth but which was human in origins, or simply as something else. 3 or 4 is really something which we're aiming for, nothing more, nothing less. Now, a glimmer of hope on the horizon has come from Paul Davies. He is arguing that the ancient alien theory, the ancient alien question, should be reframed as a science called astroforensics. It is his conviction that astroforensics should go out and study DNA, should study the geological record, should study stars, should study everything within the archaeological world, and look for evidence of contact with a non-human alien intelligence. He is of the opinion that contact with this alien intelligence did not occur within the possibility of the last 5,000 years. He is of the conviction that ancient aliens might have been on planet Earth, but that this happened somehow hundreds of thousands of years, millions of years, maybe even billions of years. But it is clear when we look at the archaeological record and the mythological record that all our ancestors were screaming it at an extremely loud voice, and that voice was this: we were not alone. We were not alone on the road of civilization. We walked the path of civilization, and we were guided on this path by a non-human intelligence. Whether you want to call this a physical alien being or whether you would want to call it something else, it doesn't really matter. The examples are there. Now, to understand this idea of ancient alien contact, we actually need to go into the present times as well. And it is here where I understood that stories like Imhotep, who says that he found information about how to build the pyramids from a non-human intelligence, also has components in our today's reality. Probably the most famous example of this is Terence McKenna. Terence McKenna was an anthropologist who went into the Amazon rainforest. He partook of a potion called ayahuasca, which he said opened his mind, projected his mind into another dimension, and in that other dimension he made contact with non-human intelligences. He said that they gave him a piece of information which was the fabric of time, how time was constructed, and how the fabric of time really was a fractal wave. They gave him a mathematical formula, and he brought this mathematical formula with him from this other dimension into our present reality. And for approximately 30 years, he subjected this to analysis, gave it to people for various experimentations with them. They were made into computer programs. It was believed that novelty, new things, was somehow related to this concept of time. And he also believed that time at some point was going to run out. Now, Terence McKenna's example of time wave zero, or the time wave, or whatever you want to call it, this fractal wave, this mathematical equation, is really very good evidence of a non-human intelligence giving mankind information. And so we see that this is not just happening in the past, but also in the present. And so I think we have to distinguish as well when we are defining ancient aliens. When von Däniken posed the question in the 1960s, very much the question on everybody's mind was whether a physical ET came here and gave us information. And the story of Owanis is clearly an example of where this is likely the case. Duncan Lunan says that there are 3 to 4 of such potential contacts in the history of our civilization, but not more. But when we are talking about non-human contact, somehow us being able to make contact with a non-human intelligence through psychological, spiritual, or whatever means possible, really what we're seeing there is an entirely different playing field. Terence McKenna is one of them, but examples like George Van Tassel, who was a UFO contactee and who said that he was given information about acoustics from these extraterrestrial, these non-human intelligences, is another example of something which I think really breaks the field of ancient aliens wide open. If somehow we were able to identify whether or not there is a science of the soul, whether spirit really exists and whether spirit is able to communicate with spirit through telepathy, when those questions get answered, the ancient alien question will be transformed in a completely different bailiwick. And really, once again, we are waiting for science to catch up, because all of those areas of expertise are once again areas where science is not going. And so the ancient alien question, what is the answer? The answer is yes. If your burden of proof is reasonable, then the answer to the ancient alien question is yes. We have been contacted in the past. We have been contacted in the not too distant past. Terence McKenna is an example of this. However, if you put your burden of proof extremely high, you will have to conclude that the answer is no. And specifically, you are able to do so because science is helping you in escaping the positive answer. But really, when you weigh all the evidence, there is only one conclusion which we can draw. And that one is that we were not alone.